This webinar is provided as an overview of documentation standards for related service providers based on recent changes to the North Carolina Division of Health Benefits Medicaid Policy 10C and the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction's launch of the Every Child Accountability Tracking System, or ECATS, for school year 2019-20. Content informed by licensure and professional standards of practice for documentation in school psychology, school counseling, school nursing, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech-language pathology, and audiology will be addressed. In addition, the practices shared here will be inclusive of documentation for services to students with individual education programs, individual healthcare plans, Section 504 plans, and behavior intervention plans. Finally, these guidelines apply to all practitioners serving students under one of these plan types, including contract providers. As a disclaimer, this presentation will not provide guidance on the policies governing any of these plan types. The presentation will also not specifically address documentation of the plan themselves, nor will this webinar be a tutorial on how to enter documentation into the ECATS for the documentation module or any other documentation software. Rather, we will focus our attention on what to enter into any documentation platform, computerized or paper. Before we move on into the details of documentation best practices, we need to be clear on a couple of points. First, NCDPI provides general supervision and technical assistance to administrators and related service providers regarding documentation practices, but the agency does not own or have oversight of the Division of Health Benefit Policy. As such, while DPI supports public school units' Medicaid reimbursement through resources like the free service documentation module, DPI does not mandate use of specific forms or software for documentation or claim generation. That said, local documentation should comply with practitioner licensure rules, the policies governing the relevant plan type, the Division of Health Benefits LEA Policy 10C, and the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act, or FERPA. We also recognize practitioner documentation is not primarily a function of Medicaid reimbursement. First and foremost, documentation is kept to help school teams meet students' needs and ensure students are appropriately educated. While there are many types of documentation for related service providers, the majority of writing time is invested in developing evaluation reports, plans of care, treatment notes, and progress notes. These aspects of documentation are shared across disciplines and plan types. To be sure, for students with IEPs, writing present level of academic achievement and functional performance and annual goals also requires significant documentation skill and time. However, given best practices in those areas are common across all team members, listeners are referred to the EC Division resources on IEP development for guidance with IEP development. We'll explore each of these 4 documentation types more closely. For each area, we will discuss the common features of educationally relevant and Medicaid compliant documentation. Then, the last slide in each section will provide links to discipline-specific guidance for that aspect of documentation. So, we'll start with the evaluation or assessment report. This section will provide guidance on evaluations. Because educational relevance is the standard for school-based documentation, these evaluation or assessment report features include and may exceed what is required for Medicaid compliance alone. This discussion presumes that given whichever statute or policy applies to the evaluation, all referral and parent consent requirements have been met. The evaluation or assessment must be a separate report created by the licensed practitioner. Data from the standalone report can be used to populate other forms and documents, but forms associated with a given policy or program, for example, the summary of evaluation data in the ECATS IEP module, cannot be the sole source or location of a provider's evaluation report. In schools, we use the referral to focus the inquiry, which generates the evaluation questions that need to be answered, and the design of the evaluation plan. When a plan is developed, the relevant additional data are collected. Multiple sources of data from record reviews, interviews, observation, and test measures following the review, interview, observe, and test or RIOT model are gathered to build the evaluation report. Evaluation reports document the provider's investigation of the student's performance at school. This report should provide a compelling, high-definition picture of the student's strengths, what supports the student's participation at school, what needs the student has, and what inhibits the student's participation at school. The report should be an accurate and succinct record of who, what, when, where, how, and why data was collected and what the data means. After reading the evaluation report, team members should be able to answer any number of these questions. What supports or constrains the student's performance? What does the student need to participate and make progress in the general education curriculum and environment? What does the student need to access the classroom and campus, including transportation? Is this a student with a disability? Does the student require accommodations or specially designed instruction? And if so, what needs to be in a plan? Discipline-specific interpretation of student performance data is a central feature of school-based evaluations. These sentence starters may be helpful in articulating the practitioner's analysis. For instance, we should be able to let the student's team understand or know what these data mean, or compared to other students in this setting, this student's, and then we would fill in with the data about that particular student's performance. Or this student's performance inhibitors and supporters are, and then we would list what those inhibitors and supporters are. Note, the need for a particular service, accommodation, modification, or other formalized support are not predetermined in the evaluation report. After weighing all of the student's performance data, teams must determine if a student requires some kind of plan. Then, as part of plan development and not before, the selection of specific supports and services occurs. So these hyperlinks lead to documentation guidance for school-based practitioners as they prepare evaluation or assessment reports. Those disciplines that don't have a hyperlinked name are encouraged to contact their relevant consultant. The next session provides guidance on documenting plans of care. Again, because educational relevance is the standard for school-based documentation, these plan of care features include and may exceed what is required for Medicaid compliance alone. The plan of care documents the goals, intervention approaches, and types of interventions to be used to achieve the student and team's identified target outcomes. The provider's plan of care is based on the student's plan and may share some of the same components, but like a teacher's lesson plan, is not part of the student's plan. In addition, where the student's plan is written at the participation level of functioning, the plan of care may address more impairment level concerns and how those inform selection of evidence-based interventions. Plans of care also document collaborations like home programming, classroom supports, and how and if the practitioner will coordinate care with community providers. Further, the plan of care should be a working document and regularly reviewed as student performance changes. A clear, actionable plan of care is essential if a therapy assistant is the primary service provider for a student. Here we can see the plan of care components, which along with the evaluation or reevaluation report and the student's plan, make a case for why the related service is needed or needs to continue. The plan of care will include short and long-term functional goals. It may contain specific measurable objectives for each of those functional goals. It would include a start and end date that's no more than 1 year in length. And we do encourage periodic review of the plan of care within that 1 year time period. Plan of care will also include discipline-specific working diagnoses and any related medical diagnoses. The practitioner should also make an assessment of the student's rehabilitative or habilitative potential and project what skilled interventions will be used in the course of care. The frequency, duration, and location of service should be described in the plan of care, as well as include the name, credentials, and signatures of the professional who has developed and completed the plan. Listeners are encouraged to also read Medicaid Policy 10C requirements for the plan of care. This list in the following slide provides some examples of language that can be used in developing plans of care. Language that highlights the skilled nature of anticipated interventions and why a licensed provider is needed to design and deliver the intervention. We won't go through each of these items here in detail, but they are provided as a reference. We encourage practitioners to have conversations over these and add to the list with their colleagues. The next section provides guidance on documenting treatment notes or contact notes or session notes, whatever you like to call the documentation that follows services provided directly with a student. And again, because educational relevance is the standard for school-based documentation, the features described here for a contact note or a treatment note may exceed what's required for Medicaid compliance alone. As the saying goes in the provision of healthcare services, regardless of the practice setting, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. The contact or treatment note or session note contains progress monitoring data and several other components. These notes are the basis of ongoing problem solving to ensure student growth is sufficient to meet goals and eventually age and grade level standards. For public school units seeking reimbursement for services, the contact note is the documentation used for claim generation and, under Medicaid standards, must make the case for medical necessity. So the intervention, treatment, or encounter note is completed after each student-related contact and should indicate which student goals or objectives were addressed during the session. In addition, the note should describe the activities that were used during the session, which interventions were skilled, any type of environmental or task modification that was done, any equipment or technology work that was completed, and any training or education or coaching or technical assistance that was provided and with whom. The practitioner should always, as part of the treatment note, assess the student's response and indicate what type of progress the student made during the session. And again, the logistical details would also be included in each treatment or contact note. The contact note would also indicate what the plan for the next treatment session will be and should be signed and dated with the practitioner's credentials. If a scheduled session does not occur, related service providers should document the reason the service was missed. For services provided by a licensed therapy assistant, all licensure board rules for supervision apply. Co-signature of service documentation completed by therapy assistants does not require supervisory signature, nor does a supervisor's signature demonstrate that appropriate supervision has occurred. For students receiving services in a group setting, providers should document the amount of skilled service time each student on the caseload received. The note should also include the number of students that were in the group. And finally, for consultations, which is a critical feature of school-based practice for related service providers, it should be documented as diligently and accurately as a direct student contact. Even though Medicaid doesn't reimburse for consultative services, documentation demonstrates communication and collaboration is a valued aspect of supporting student growth. Again, here links to practitioner-specific supports and guidance on the contact note can be found. Finally, we will talk about the progress report. Like the documentation areas we've discussed already, progress reports serve a variety of purposes and are written for a variety of audience members. These reports are the primary way for team members to understand how the student is responding to service from a given related service perspective. We also learned from the 2017 Supreme Court decision on Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District that having a record of student progress is inseparable from providing FAPE. This means greater emphasis and attention must be given to ensuring that progress reports accurately demonstrate that the student is meeting challenging objectives, or if not, that the school team is engaged in problem solving to change that trajectory and ensure students will respond. And so we encourage, like with the IEP process, that any plan type progress summaries go out with the issuance of general education report cards unless a local policy specifies otherwise. We want to ensure that these progress summaries are written in parent-friendly language and that they include data related to the student's goals, that data identifies the student rate of learning and likelihood of meeting the goal by the end of the planned date, and also makes a case for why the services need to continue or in some cases need to stop. And again, discipline-specific resources on developing progress reports can be found at these links. Finally, some closing comments on the logistics of documentation. Documentation developed by any related service provider is the property of the public school unit, not the individual practitioner. It is also part of the educational record. Under FERPA, parents have a right to view, control access to, and ask for edits to practitioner documentation. Documentation should be kept in an accessible location year-round, including summer storage. As most documentation moves to electronic formats, public school units should ensure access to practitioner records, particularly if and when a related service provider ends employment with the public school unit. Best practices for quality assurance within the aspects of documentation addressed in this webinar include internal auditing and peer review. Internal audits using an all-stakeholder developed rubric which may include metrics for quality, compliance, timeliness, parent friendliness, educational relevance, etc., are an excellent method for assessing the health of related service provider documentation. Peer review might use similar metrics plus discipline-specific quality measures. Finally, the Division of Health Benefit reserves the right for monitoring utilization, quality, and appropriateness of all services rendered, as well as compliance with all applicable clinical coverage policies. Post-payment reviews may be done in limited scope to address specific complaints if a school district is suspected of aberrant practices, and those reviews may be conducted using a statistically valid random sample of paid claims. For further information on discipline-specific documentation guidance, please contact your relevant state consultant. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this webinar, and be in touch with additional questions.